Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome back to another edition of Clarity from Chaos. In an era where information overload and constant change are the norm, finding some clarity amidst all of this chaos seems to be like a very daunting task. I would like to introduce someone, though, who has spent a lifetime in keeping the chaos at bay, Mr. Bill Walton. Bill is known as the Unwoke CEO and the host of The Bill Walton Show. In addition, Bill chairs the Resolute Protector Foundation, a media production company that creates and produces original educational and entertainment content. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Great to have me on, David. Thank you.
I'd like to kind of start out with talking about the Trump effect, because the minute that the media declared Trump the victor in the election, it just seemed like the whole world just took a giant pause and shift back to somewhat of certain amount of normalcy. And I'd like to talk about that just a little bit and your thoughts on it, because it's, to me, it seems like for 4 years we've been sitting here just kind of holding our breath, you know, waiting for some kind of, oh my God moment. And then all of a sudden Trump gets reelected, and it was like the entire globe just took a giant exhaled a giant pause, you know, and oh, thank you, you know.
Well, maybe except for Liz Cheney.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
And Dick.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I think it's real. I think you're absolutely right in the way you assess it. It's palpable. I worked in 2016. I was head of part of Trump's transition, overseeing all the financial agencies, and we wrote the plans for Treasury, IRS, Commerce, et cetera. And you know, we were in Washington. Trump was up in Trump Tower trying to win the election, which is what he should have been doing. Right. And there was a real disconnect from his transition team and what he was doing. And he didn't much trust anybody in Washington, didn't know anybody in Washington.
Sure.
And came in and just, as we know, it was chaotic from day one, chaotic actually before day one. And so he learned from that. And, you know, he was 4 years on the job, did a fantastic job on economics and keeping us safe. And, you know, he began to beat back the woke nonsense. And then Biden, we were sort of in a nuclear winter, and the guy had his feeble hand on the button, and so we were holding our breath for a lot of reasons. I thought he was going to get us killed by the way he was handling Ukraine. The thing that is different now with this transition is that everybody's in Mar-a-Lago. It's the de facto White House now. And he knows what to do, and he's also got all these positions staffed. He was nowhere close to this in early January 2020. So this is or 2017.
17, right?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, it's real.
Yeah, he wasn't anywhere close. It's almost like for the last 4 years, and I find this interesting, but for the last 4 years, he's been putting together the entire game plan. So the minute the gavel dropped on election day, he just opened up the 3-ring binder and got after it right then and there. And I think it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see the way the Senate approaches this. But I've got to say that it's refreshing having, to your terms, and it's absolutely completely correct, going through this nuclear winter. And for those of us that went through the, God rest his soul, Jimmy Carter nuclear winter, it was just a replication of that 4 years worth of going down the porcelain chute. I think his cabinet choices are just, quite frankly, in some cases, remarkable.
Oh, so do I. I mean, particularly Chris Wright at Energy.
Yeah.
He's written the book on energy, and he's got built a tremendous shale shale business, and he went to MIT undergrad. He's a rocket scientist, knows his energy
Yep.
science cold. I think he's going to make a big difference when we drill, build, baby, drilled is a little more complicated than just
Yeah.
those three words, but he understands that.
Yeah. And, the interesting thing is part of my previous career, I was in the nuclear industry and saw its demise.
Were
Right.
you building commercial nuclear?
Yeah. I was part of the build construct. Well, actually, I started out with the breeder program at Hanford, where they were going to build Clinch River, and then, of course, Carter put his thumb right in the middle of that and killed it, and it kind of went down from that point. But yeah, I was in the industry for almost 20 years.
Dust off your resume. We're going to need you. I think that's on the horizon.
Yeah, the interesting thing is all the SMRs that are coming out. The small modular reactors.
Mm-hmm.
That whole environment is going to completely revolutionize the world if they can get that up and going, because all of your third world countries that don't have that built-in infrastructure, they can bring those things in on helipad and on helicopters and drop them in place. And Africa, for example, could just almost overnight be modernized just to a certain extent with the technology and power. So it's going to be remarkable just to see that whole piece go.
You look at who's now surrounding Trump. That's another thing that's just astonishing. I mean, it started really with Elon Musk and him making a decision to go all in with Trump.
Yeah.
I don't know whether your show's PG or not, but somebody asked him when he was campaigning full time for him in Pennsylvania, somebody asked him sort of mid campaign. He said, "So what happens if Trump doesn't win?" And he said, "I'm fucked."
Yeah. Well, fortunately, he's not.
But he's brought a lot of those people with him. I mean, Vivek is there. He'd already run for president, but there are a lot of guys from Silicon Valley like David Sachs and Mark Andreessen who are big brains and understand nuclear, understand all the things we're talking about. And they also understand if we want to do AI and be a leader in that, we're going to need real energy sources.
Exactly. And this whole lunacy around electric cars, I kind of get that a little bit, but the whole simple fact of the matter was we didn't even have the infrastructure to support it. And to support AI, and I just saw the $20 billion investment that, Dubai is going to throw in for the data centers and stuff. But from a power standpoint, they're going to have to get all of that up and running again completely and build it out. It's just, that's why I was saying the whole SMR.
How long will it take to do that? I mean, what's our lead time on all these energy sources, do you think?
Unfortunately, I think if he pulled the trigger starting January 20th, you're probably 5 to 10 years out to having a lot of that stuff in place.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, if they actually did a John Kennedy, kind of thing about launching it to the moon, this is what we need to do, and put a full court press on it, we could get there probably a little bit faster. But he would have to eliminate a lot of the, quite frankly, the bureaucracy, the deep state BS.
Well, that's the big thing. People talk about growth. If we could roll back, what do we now? The numbers are uncountable. How many stacks of paper would fill a room with all the federal regulations? I mean, if we made a serious dent in regulations, you can unleash the private sector to do things in a hurry.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, if you just look at Elon and his rocket program, for God's sake, NASA was never able to bring a booster back and drop it right back on its launch pad.
Wasn't that incredible?
And you sit there and watch that, and the best that NASA could do is drop them in the ocean, and here Elon's got the whole booster coming back in and dropping right back down on the launch pad. And you just have to sit there and scratch your head like, how can he figure this crap out and these other geniuses couldn't? So, but
he did, and I'm glad he's with us on this. And
I am too. Quite frankly, I think between Vivek and Elon, if they're if they can even do half of what they're trying to do from what is it, the Doge program or whatever they're
Department
talking.
of Government Efficiency. You know
Yeah,
that oxymorons, two words that shouldn't be
exactly.
used together.
It,
Government efficiency. That's a
you know,
funny phrase.
yeah, exactly. If they can even do just half of that,
Yeah.
or even start the conversations of eliminating all of this fraud and abuse and everything else, that would essentially go a long way. And then they're talking about, either eliminating or extremely paring back the Department of Education, which would be great if they turn around and let the education piece actually start to serve the people in the country.
Well, we don't. We don't need it. I mean,
No, no,
states, people have been doing a pretty good job educating their children.
right,
And we all know the public education system was a progressive agenda in 1880, 1890 to
right.
get kids used to, towing the line and
Yeah.
marching to the progressive tune. And that system is still the same. We're still operating with a 19th century technology in our schools.
Oh, absolutely.
If you walk into a schoolroom now, it doesn't look any different really, except for maybe a few computers on the side of the room as it looked in 1890. And that's when the progressives set it up. It's time to rethink the whole thing. And certainly the feds
Right.
shouldn't have any role in that.
The funny thing is, Bill, I had a 1895 eighth grade primer
Oh, really?
from the state of Kansas.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anybody with a master's degree that could pass an eighth grade primer, right? From 1895. Now that to me tells it right there that there's a problem. There's a problem.
Well, yeah, and with the standard, we could do 15,000. I've owned not dozens, but probably 10 or 15 education businesses, started a few. I don't recommend it as an industry, particularly until we can loosen up the
Right.
blob's grasp on it. But
Right.
you mentioned the Doge. The thing I'm interested in is one of the things that Musk is a genius at is business processes. He's as interested in how you manufacture Tesla, for example, as he is in making as the actual car itself. He's been a manufacturing genius. And again, that 19th century technology, our government basically is a 19th century technology.
Yep.
And if you get him and his team in there and they start analyzing business processes, they can look at all sorts of agencies and say, well, wait a second, the IRS has got 85,000 people and they've got computers that date back to the 60s.
Right.
Why don't we put this on its head and start rethinking this as information technology experts? And we could probably drop 60, 70,000 employees at the IRS in one fell swoop. So, that kind of big thinking, then of course we're going to get the lawyers out and we're going to talk about who you can get rid of. And, we all know, and the Democrats are going to push back and the unions are going to push back. We all know the fights, but you can't have a good fight. You can't have the right fight unless you define a big objective.
No, and until you start the conversation to have that fight, you're not gonna ever have it. And that's what I think Trump's genius is to bring in two provocateurs into the mix to start shaking things up and creating that conversation.
Well, and he's also got this guy. His FBI appointment. Cash. Patel. He's going to be a change agent. If he stays alive.
Yeah, I don't think, quite frankly, Bill, that there would have been anybody better to have picked for that point, in that position than Cash Patel.
I agree.
And quite frankly, I think the entire C-level suite at the FBI, if they're not, they should be just putting their resumes together and getting ready to leave, because he's going to come in there and scrub that whole place down. We may go further. The FBI doesn't have a franchise. Is never authorized by Congress. Right.
There was a letter from an attorney general back in 1908 that said we need a police force to go after anarchists, which is pretty funny. I don't know who the anarchists were in 1908, but I'm sure they were.
Yeah, There, yeah, there's just like with McCarthy. I mean, there were some, but yeah, you're
Probably
absolutely right.
do you think parents at school board meetings in 1908 were
There you go. There you go. That was the whole reason is the parents at the school board meetings. So we created an FBI. And then, of course, he came along with J. Edgar, who basically blackmailed everybody in Congress and everything else, was snooping on everybody that he could snoop on.
yeah.
Um, yeah, the whole thing. Interesting. Do you have any thoughts on Gabbard and Hegseth? I think Gabbard would be a great DNI. I do, but was interested in your thought on that.
Well, neither one of them have any administrative experience. They've never run anything.
Right.
I'll do the negatives. They don't. No way either one of them's come remotely close to running even a small business, and to take over. How many people are in the
Oh my
mall of the
goodness.
Defense Department?
I
3 or
would say
4 million.
30,000
Well,
people
Defense
in
Department's a couple, 2-3 million if you include all the
Okay.
contractors.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And what Tulsi's taking on, I think, if you look at all the individual pieces, I don't know the numbers, but it's a pretty complex bureaucracy. So,
Yeah.
but I do. That's the negative. The positive is one of the big things we need to do with our military is restore morale, and
Yeah.
they've gutted it. They've gutted this woke agenda, the DEI agenda. The head of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, when he ran the Air Force, had quotas for pilots, and he would say we could only have 47% of our pilots be white males.
Yeah.
Well, guess what, guys? That's not a group that we're not finding. And he also had a quota for, I think it was like 0.2% of Pacific Islanders had to be pilots. It was a very, it was insane.
Yeah.
And so if Pete Hegseth can change the culture and root that out, that would be huge. And then
Right.
what my view is he needs a really strong deputy. Deputies run most of these agencies.
Right.
And if he could get a strong 2-3 guys that have got maybe even some experiences in technology, I mean, Musk could take a look at the way they're sourcing, all that stuff. Ripe for opportunity if he's smart enough to figure out how to get other people on his team to do that.
Yep.
He's not the guy for that.
Yeah. Well, so my other interesting piece is I'm looking down the road because obviously, Trump's got 4 years to try to undo a massive, massive mess. But what I'm expecting Trump to do is to set the RNC up for the future, Bill. And I was wondering about your thoughts on that because to me, you've got a pretty good bench out there compared to right now. The DNC is, my God, I mean, they're still scratching their head and trying to figure out how come they got their butt handed to them.
In terms of viable candidates, their bench is empty.
Yeah, yeah. So, part of what I think Trump needs to do, and I'm really interested in your thought, is to create an environment to where this whole thing continues going forward and not just 4 years and then we end up with another Biden fiasco.
Well, he's going to need some. He's going to need some. Well, I think he's going to come out of the box very strong. I think the first. He's got to get that big, beautiful bill passed. He's got to get the tax thing permanent. He needs to get the border closed. I mean, he's got some big things that are day one jobs, but then he's also got, the problem. It's a real problem, and he hasn't shown much interest in attacking it, which is the $35 or $36 trillion.
He's got the debt
that we have. He's never been a good cost cutter.
Right.
And, so that's going to be an issue that's going to have to be addressed.
Yeah.
But our bench is chock full. I mean, JD's an obvious guy that's already in there. But we've got Ron DeSantis and, several other people that I think would be, you could have a 12-year run if you can make that happen.
Yeah. And the reason I bring it up is I think it's going to take that long to get things, Trump can start to turn the Queen Mary, but it's going to take a lot longer than 4 years to actually get things going in some kind of permanence to where people are comfortable and can start looking forward again. This 4 years and 4 years and 4 years, not so much, because every 2 years you've got the damn house flipping over or whatever, right? So you run into that scenario. So you've literally he's got 2 years right now of a Republican Congress and Senate to get things done. And then hopefully if it's done well enough and right enough, then he can hold on to the majority. But that's going to be the issue.
Well, and we know most of the Senate is not MAGA. I mean, they're hard.
Right.
You can count the number of senators on one hand that are pretty much really completely aligned with what he wants to do. Mike Lee, Ted Cruz, probably.
Yeah,
You
right.
can, but the other John Thune. I mean,
Yeah.
John Thune's most conservative day was when he beat Tom Daschle.
Yeah.
By a hair's breadth.
Yeah.
20 years ago, whenever that happened. So he's going to have problems with the Senate. He's going to have problems with the House. There are a lot of appropriators in the House, a lot of business as usual people. I mean, the inertia he's going to come up against is huge, and he's going to have to prevent fights like the one, or at least manage the fights like we're having now between Steve Bannon and Elon Elon Musk over the H-1
over the visas.
Yeah.
Right.
We all know and love Steve Bannon, but it does seem like he's picking a fight with Elon, because 8 years ago, Steve was the fair-haired boy.
Well, he's trying to be relevant, right?
Yeah, he's trying to be. Yeah, so, and I don't know much. And so he's saying he's a populist nationalist. I think if we're going to really get the economy going, we can't look inward that much. We've got to be pragmatic about bringing some talent in. And the program does need to be substantially revised, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do some of that.
No, and I think where Steve is missing the boat on some of that stuff is we've got a serious mediocrity problem.
Oh yeah.
In our education and stuff. And the H1 and the H1B visa stuff does tend to help solve and create, a little bit more meritocracy as opposed to the mediocrity that we're getting. And so I think it should be a kind of a parallel effort of
well, yeah, most of our 99% of our kids couldn't pass, high school grads couldn't pass that 8th grade reader you had.
No, exactly. And that's my point, that, I'm sure that institutions like MIT and so on and so forth have, but if I sit here and look here locally, like at Georgia Tech, the majority are kids from other countries are going to Georgia Tech. It's not a bunch of kids off the farm here in Georgia going to Georgia Tech. You've got people from the Middle East, the Far East, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And because their culture demands that education a lot more, I think, than unfortunately we do, right? As far as read, writing, and arithmetic, we're more concerned in a lot of cases as basket weaving in a lot of these institutions than we are, the actual nuts and bolts of a lot of things.
Well, the only reason you'd have a Department of Education is if you could just turn it into the place to put out ideas about how education ought to be done, and letting people in the states engineer how they want to do it in their own state. We ought not to be dictating things, but we do need a complete rethink of how we're educating kids. And, they're not teaching values in schools. They've taken prayer out of schools, or, they're teaching to the lowest common denominator in many cases. We've gotten rid of elite advanced programs because they're just that, they're elitist. And, that's suicide. We're committing educational suicide. And so, on the one hand, we want to have Americans fill the jobs, Steve, but our educational system is not producing them right now. Now, if we did something radical, maybe 5-10 years from now, we'd be, we could be, king of the hill, but right now we're not.
No. And for the last, 40 years, 50 years, it's been going extremely downhill anyway. So it's not going to happen overnight. So, I think Bannon needs to maybe start looking at a little bit more long-term and because I'm pretty sure that Musk was viewing it basically on the way we're talking about it. And
well, he is, and what he doesn't see is that the H-1B program's got a lot of very mediocre, low-level
right,
programmer types, and yeah, those jobs could go to the kids from Georgia Tech who weren't from the United States who could do those
right,
jobs just fine. It's been abused. I mean, it does need to be fixed. But Elon's, one thing about Musk that I've learned is that he surrounds himself with people that are almost as smart as he is. And he's
yeah,
if you go to Silicon Valley, of course, you know what that is. I mean, it looks like the United Nations. I mean, they're
right.
60% 60% of the Fortune 500 companies, or the S&P 500 companies, were founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. 55 or 60% of the AI companies now are
Right.
the founders are immigrants or children of immigrants. And you look at the whole technology field. If we want to be a leader there, we got to be pragmatic about where
Yep.
the
Where the
entrepreneurial
talent is.
technological
Yeah,
talent's coming from. So
yeah, absolutely.
and I'm sure Steve doesn't want to see us lose ground to the Chinese in AI, or lose ground to in all these other areas that we've got to be competitive.
No, no, I wouldn't think so. But I think probably part of the whole argument with him is, like we had said at the outset, is just trying to create a certain amount of relevance to where
I think some of this is personal.
Yeah, well, it could very well be. It could very well be. Could very well be. So where can people find your podcast, Bill?
Well, it's pretty easy. We're on YouTube. It's the BillWaltonShow.com. We're on Rumble. We're on Spotify. We're on all the audio podcasts as well. We've got a page on Substack where you can find the podcast. And I started the show out with this fancy name, On Common Ground, with Bill Walton. And then after doing that for less than a year, I couldn't find any real common ground. Yeah. I like the name of your show a lot better. And anyway, so I just defaulted to calling it the Bill Walton Show. Not very creative, but it's easy to find. And now that the basketball player is no longer with us, I don't have to compete with him for clicks.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about playing center for the
right. Well, I would have liked that.
Yeah, there you go. Your website, you've already gone over that. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Bill, to have you on the show, and I look forward to some future point where we can actually sit down and have another conversation.
Happy to do it. There's a lot we didn't cover today, and maybe next time we can talk about Mark Zuckerberg. How about that for a teaser?
Yeah, there you go. Well, thanks once again,
Bill. Great talking with you.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.